You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record. It's been a while since I've given a NXIVM update. First thing I want to talk about is the fact that the NXIVM members have formed a Prisoners Family Advocate Alliance called the Forgotten One, or in typical Keith Raniere gobbledygook talk, We Are As You. No, seriously, it's really called We Are As You. Nowhere on their Instagram will you find the words Keith Raniere, NXIVM, or sex cult. In true cult fashion, they hide who they are and what they are all about. So, what does We Are As You do? Do they mobilize for better prison conditions? Do they advocate for better prison programs? No, they dance in front of Keith Raniere's jail from 7 to 9 p.m. on Friday nights. And this is to highlight the loss of quality of life that prisoners, i.e. cult devotees, are experiencing since visitations have been put on hold during the COVID crisis. So essentially, they are having a public dance tantrum that they cannot commune with the great Vanguard Keith Raniere. They, the Forgotten Ones, aka NXIVM, are ripping a page out of the Innocence Fraud book and are in the process of making a documentary. Now, is this documentary going to be about how the government unfairly prosecuted and convicted the great Vanguard and his devotees because they were healing people without big pharma? Or is it going to be about the Forgotten Ones in prison? The family strife, essentially rebranding NXIVM to the clueless public and bringing in money for their new cause, prisoners. So let me know in the comments section what you think the documentary is going to be about. It's really anyone's guess. And in other NXIVM news, there have been several Zoom hearings, meaning remote hearings, due to COVID that I've been fortunate enough to listen into. Clare Bronfman has had 2 hearings regarding her sentencing, and Keith won. And because Keith is the Vanguard, let's start with him. There's a theme running through both these hearings, both Clare and Keith's hearings, which is both convicted criminals want their sentencing delayed. Now, it was great to hear Mr. 100%, Mark Agnifilo, argue that Keith's hearing has to be delayed because due to COVID, he hasn't been able to meet with his client. And the great Judge Carafas, who puts up with no nonsense, said basically, call the jail and they should be able to accommodate a meeting. And if they don't, I will arrange for you to meet in a room in the courthouse. And he said he really was reluctant to do that because it comes with all sorts of other problems, being that it's so unorthodox, and that really he should first call the jail and ask to meet with his client. And victims will speak in person and via Zoom at Keith Raniere's hearing. And it may be held in the old Brooklyn courthouse to accommodate the press and the public. And his hearing is set for October 27th. That's a Tuesday at 10 a.m. And I will be in attendance. Now, Clare Bronfman's initial hearing, she has lost a great asset. Her lawyer, Kathleen Cassidy, has dropped her as a client. Cassidy was the defense lawyer that impressed me the most. She's incredibly smart and dedicated and hardworking, and doesn't sound like a used car salesman when she makes her arguments. So now Clare has brought on Ron Sullivan, who is a Harvard law professor who, in true NXIVM style, doesn't file his taxes. And he, in fact, owes over $1 million in taxes for just 2 years of the 10 years he owes. So God knows how much all that he owes put together is. And that, is, of course, is the perfect lawyer for Clare Bronfman, because he will bill endless hours for her and not be too critical of who he's working for. And the, I would say, vague moral compass that she has. He also lost his Harvard deanship when he represented Harvey Weinstein in his criminal trial. Now, the first hearing, Claire's lawyer argued, should be moved to a later date due to COVID because her mother and her sister, Sarah Bronfman, could not fly to the U.S. to attend her trial remotely. Now, remember, Sarah Bronfman was deeply involved in NXIVM, but strangely moved to France right before the NXIVM indictments came down, and being a French citizen, she cannot be extradited to the U.S., and she didn't come to the U.S. for Claire's bail hearing. She's not coming to the U.S. for her sentencing. This is just a ridiculous argument intended to just throw out anything on the wall and see what sticks to delay the inevitable, which is Claire's sentencing and going to prison. And Judge Garifas slammed down those arguments and said basically it's not law to have your family in the courtroom for your sentencing. He couldn't think of any law that demanded that the defendants and convicted, what she is now, a convicted criminal, should have any law that mandates a convicted criminal's family in the courtroom. And the second hearing was much more interesting, and apparently Clare Bronfman and her lawyer, Ron Sullivan, want us to forget Keith Raniere's 6-week trial and all the atrocities that we witnessed during that trial. I mean, I think we all really needed therapy after attending that trial, and I will never forget the victims, survivors, his victims, and what he did to them, locking them in rooms for years, their mental state, starving, branding, and just the betrayal, putting cameras in their homes to keep eyes on them. And she wants us to forget all that. And it to only be based on the 2 things that she pled guilty to. So she wants her sentencing only to be based on the 2 things she pled guilty to. Conspiracy to conceal and harbor illegal immigrants for financial gain, and fraudulent use of identification. And she also wants us to forget her $4.6 million forfeiture that she paid the state to get that deal. She bought that deal. That was the best deal she could buy. No more than 27 months. If it's more than 27 months, she can appeal for those 2 puny charges. And she's refusing to admit that she was ever part of DOS or any kind of sex cult, and that RICO charges should have nothing to do with her sentencing. And Judge Garifas did not take kindly to this, once again, this nonsense. And he said, Excuse me? I'm not new to this party, sir. She was writing checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars for this enterprise. You're claiming she wasn't even a party to the criminal enterprise? She was writing a lot of checks, unquote. And he reminded Team Bronfman that it took a year for the court to get her financial records. So it looks like Clare Bronfman might withdraw her plea and have a Fatico hearing, which is a sentencing hearing where both sides present evidence about what the sentence should be. But Judge Garifas warned Bronfman, should she do that, he will demand that she take the stand and be cross-examined. Judge Garifas also brought up her short time that she was represented by Michael Avenatti, and I believe he brought this up to remind her how Clare Bronfman was not forthcoming about adding Michael Avenatti to her legal team. And when she was pushed and confronted on this, she fake fainted in the court, and I was there in the court to see that. And I have no doubt that that was a fake faint. to get out of answering questions. So I don't think she will handle very well being cross-examined. She has never had to answer for anything in her life, really. Everything has been handled by money, and she will not stand up to a vigorous cross-examination or even a lazy cross-examination. So Judge Garifas does not forget anything, and this is not a good thing for Clare Bronfman and her September 30th sentencing hearing. The judge has also hinted he may give her more than the recommended 27 months, and it seems Bronfman is happy to keep delaying her fate any way she can. So much for taking responsibility for her bad acts. And before I finish this episode, I want to talk about the new HBO documentary, The Vow. Now, the first episode just came out Sunday night, and it really is, I think what they're doing is they're setting us all up for revealing all the horrors of NXIVM. So the first episode is really an advertisement for NXIVM. And I noticed that they never shoot Keith Raniere too long. So his gobbledygook actually looks coherent and maybe even a little insightful, which I can guarantee you, if you listen for more than maybe 30 seconds to a minute, you won't know what the heck he's talking about. It's just word salad. What it did, though, was highlight how many amazing people were in NXIVM and how many talented people were victimized by NXIVM. And they brought up the Dalai Lama, but they didn't bring up the fact that Clare Bronfman and her sister Sarah Bronfman paid $1 million for him. And they brought up that he healed this one or two people, one guy from Tourette's, maybe another woman who I know sat next to me in court. So I don't know to what extent he healed her Tourette's, but she was featured for a moment and a half about it. So it looks like they really did great things. And that's always a cult argument. Sort of the ends justify the means. Well, I don't know. It's kind of a weird, unorthodox way of going about things, but it does good things. I would really say that that is a poor argument, and certainly the atrocities that NXIVM did. That is certainly not something you can measure how someone's been helped or personal growth. That's something someone feels that they got out of something. And you know, I could pick up a plastic ring and say, oh, this plastic ring stopped me from smoking. I've carried it around every day. I twirled around 6 times and now I don't fear public speaking anymore. You know, a bunch of bizarre, non-scientific things. The placebo effect is real. So I don't know where HBO is going with this. I hope that it's going where I think it's going, where we'll fully see how absolutely devastating this cult was. And I will see you back next time. Thanks so much for listening.